Imagine this. It's 1700, and life is remarkably simple, almost medieval. People live in small villages, their days shaped by the rhythms of the sun, the seasons, and the occasional village fair. The pace of life is slow, with the majority of people living off the land, growing their food by hand, and using basic tools. The world they know is mostly unchanged from ancient times. But suddenly, around the mid-18th century, something dramatic starts to unfold. This world of slow, predictable rhythms begins to fracture. A new age is coming, one defined not by the hand of man, but by the hum of machines and the roar of steam engines. The Industrial Revolution has begun, and the world will never be the same. This is the story of how a small island nation, Great Britain, sparked an era of explosive change. It was a time when humanity harnessed the power of machines to do the work of thousands of people, and this newfound energy was used to build a new world. But why did it happen in Britain? And what were the factors that allowed this tiny island to lead the world into a new age? Let's explore the 5 key pillars that enabled Britain to ignite this monumental shift and forever alter human history. The first pillar: agricultural revolution and increased productivity. The first pillar of Britain's industrial dominance was already in motion before the steam engines started turning. Britain's agricultural revolution, a transformation in farming techniques, set the stage for the larger industrial shift that would follow. This revolution began in the late 17th century and was driven by innovations like crop rotation, selective breeding, and the use of new tools. These advances dramatically increased agricultural productivity. More food could now be produced with fewer labourers. This surplus food enabled population growth and, most importantly, allowed workers to be freed up from farming and shift to factories. In other words, fewer people were needed to work the land, and the surplus workers were available to fill the new factory jobs created by industrialization. The surplus of food didn't just feed more people, it allowed them to move to cities. As people shifted from the countryside to urban centres, the demand for goods increased, and so did the need for more efficient methods of production. This agricultural surplus was one of the first sparks that ignited the Industrial Revolution, making the growing cities a driving force for industrial growth. The second pillar: political stability and government support. The second pillar of Britain's industrial rise was its political stability and governmental support. Unlike many of its European neighbours, Britain enjoyed relative political stability in the 18th century. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 had solidified the power of Parliament over the monarchy, and this helped create a more secure political environment for the rise of industrial capitalism. More importantly, Britain's political system supported entrepreneurship and the growth of business. The country's legal system protected private property, which encouraged investment in industries. Moreover, Britain's government passed laws that encouraged new businesses, from patents that protected inventors' ideas to laws that helped establish financial markets and banks. Unlike many European nations that were bogged down by wars, revolutions, and unstable monarchies, Britain's political stability created an environment where innovation could thrive. Entrepreneurs had the freedom to experiment with new ideas and technologies, and the government supported them by protecting their interests and ensuring that business practices were stable. This provided the foundation for the explosive growth of industry that would follow. The third pillar: geography and natural resources. Britain's geography and natural resources were crucial to its industrial success. Britain's abundance of coal and iron ore, two of the key ingredients for industrialization, gave it a distinct advantage. Coal powered steam engines, and iron was essential for building the machinery that would power factories, transportation, and construction projects. Britain's island geography also proved to be an asset. Surrounded by water, Britain had access to an extensive network of rivers and harbours, making transportation of raw materials and finished goods more efficient. This was especially important during the early stages of industrialization, when the movement of goods was slow and expensive. With its vast network of navigable rivers, Britain could easily transport goods between its cities and port towns. The abundance of coal in places like South Wales and the Midlands allowed Britain to fuel its factories and steam engines, while iron ore was used to build the machines and structures that were central to the revolution. These natural resources, combined with Britain's excellent infrastructure, were crucial in allowing Britain to become the leader in industrial production. The fourth pillar, the scientific revolution and a culture of innovation. The scientific revolution of the 17th century laid the groundwork for the technological innovations of the Industrial Revolution. Pioneers like Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle had helped shift society's thinking toward experimentation, observation, and understanding the laws of nature. This intellectual shift created a culture of inquiry and innovation in Britain that was essential to the technological advancements that followed. The mindset of experimentation and applying scientific discoveries to solve practical problems led to inventions that would drive industrialization. Inventions like the steam engine, the flying shuttle, and the spinning jenny were a direct result of this culture of innovation. The scientific community in Britain began to look at the world through a new lens, one that saw the potential for machines to replace human labour and make industries more efficient. Britain's universities, alongside private thinkers and engineers, began to foster the kind of research and experimentation that led to groundbreaking inventions. This connection between science and industry fueled the technological advancements of the 18th and 19th centuries and propelled Britain to the forefront of global innovation. The fifth pillar, access to capital and investment. The final pillar that allowed Britain to lead the Industrial Revolution was access to capital. In order to fund the vast new industries, Britain needed a financial system that could support large investments. By the early 18th century, Britain had a sophisticated banking system, led by the Bank of England, which had been established in 1694. This banking system allowed entrepreneurs and businesses to access the capital they needed to build factories, invest in machinery, and hire workers. The availability of credit and capital made it possible to invest in large-scale projects, from building factories to funding transportation networks like railroads. Additionally, the rise of joint stock companies, businesses where investors could pool resources and share profits, allowed for the funding of large, risky ventures. This new financial infrastructure was critical in enabling the expansion of industries like textiles, coal, and iron. The ability to mobilize large amounts of capital fueled the development of the first factories and industrial businesses. The financial system also encouraged the expansion of infrastructure, such as roads, railways, and canals, that would allow for the distribution of raw materials and finished products. The Industrial Revolution, inventions, urbanization, and social transformation. The rise of new industries and technologies. As the foundations of industrialization were set, The next wave of breakthroughs was marked by technological innovations that completely redefined production. Machines replaced human labor, and entire industries transformed. One of the first industries to experience this massive change was the textile industry, an industry that would drive much of the early industrial growth in Britain. The demand for textiles, especially cotton, skyrocketed. Britain had a taste for white gold, cotton, and this quickly became a staple commodity for the growing middle class. However, early British textile production couldn't compete with the cheap labor of India, where textiles were produced for a fraction of the cost. Indian textiles were 5 times cheaper, and their quality was unmatched. Britain struggled to keep up. But instead of accepting defeat, British entrepreneurs saw this as an opportunity to innovate. The government responded with laws that protected domestic textile industries from foreign competition, such as the Calico Acts, which prohibited the importation of Indian cotton goods. These laws didn't stop trade. They instead pushed British inventors to create faster, cheaper machinery to outpace competitors. In 1733, John Kay invented the flying shuttle, which sped up the process of weaving and allowed for wider cloth to be produced more efficiently. However, a new challenge emerged. There wasn't enough thread to keep up with the increased demand for fabric. This led to the spinning jenny. The spinning jenny, from home weaving to factory production. In 1764, James Hargreaves invented the spinning jenny, a machine that allowed one worker to spin multiple spools of cotton at once. This was a game changer. For the first time, production could be scaled up in a way that wasn't limited by human labor alone. The spinning jenny could produce much more thread, faster and cheaper than hand spinning, and it became a key invention in the textile industry. But this innovation wasn't enough. The speed of spinning had improved, but there was still a bottleneck in the weaving process. The need for innovation only increased. Then came Richard Arkwright, who took the next big step in creating the first water-powered cotton mill in 1771. Arkwright used water wheels to power his machines, creating the first large-scale industrial factory. His machines were too large for homes, which made them ideal for factory settings. Arkwright's mills represented a fundamental shift in production. Textile production was no longer a home-based industry. It was now an industrial process that required labor, machines, and capital investment. Factories could produce textiles at an unprecedented scale, leading to the birth of the industrial city. Steam power, the engine of industrialization. While the textile industry was the first to be revolutionized by machines, the steam engine was the invention that supercharged the entire industrial revolution. The idea of steam power had been around for centuries, but it wasn't until James Watt improved upon earlier designs that the steam engine became truly practical. In 1769, Watt created a more efficient steam engine by adding a separate condenser, which drastically reduced energy loss. This made steam engines far more reliable and cost-effective, allowing them to power factories, mines, and even railways. Watt's engine was quickly adopted by a variety of industries. For the first time, factories didn't need to be located near water sources like rivers. The steam engine allowed factories to be built anywhere, providing a level of geographical flexibility that had never existed before. This innovation was a turning point, as steam engines powered the new industries, made transportation faster, and unlocked new ways of utilizing resources. It was steam power that drove the expansion of factories and made mass production possible. Railroads, the new age of transportation. As steam power fueled industrial growth, it also revolutionized transportation. The steam engine, which had initially powered machines in factories, was now adapted to power railroads, opening up entirely new opportunities for trade, travel, and economic expansion. The first steam-powered railway was opened in 1825, running between Stockton and Darlington in northern England. This was a modest beginning, but it set the stage for one of the most transformative developments of the 19th century. In 1830, the Liverpool and Manchester Railway opened, connecting two of the most important cities in Britain and marking the first truly intercity railway. The success of these railroads sparked a wave of railway construction across Britain, and soon after, railroads spread to Europe and the United States. Railways became the backbone of industrial economies. They allowed raw materials like coal and iron to be transported to factories quickly, and finished goods could be shipped to new markets with unprecedented speed. Railways also facilitated the growth of urbanization. Cities like Manchester became industrial hubs, and new towns emerged along railway lines. The ease of movement brought people from rural areas to the growing industrial cities in search of jobs. Railroads were also crucial for global trade. Steamships and railroads connected distant markets, enabling nations to exchange goods, ideas, and culture at a speed that was never possible before. Urbanization and the transformation of society. As the Industrial Revolution gathered steam, it fueled a wave of urbanization. For the first time, more people lived in cities than in rural areas. This dramatic shift reshaped society and had profound social, economic, and cultural consequences. Before the Industrial Revolution, the majority of people lived in small villages, working the land and following the rhythms of nature. But with the rise of factories, people moved to urban centres in search of work. Cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and London grew rapidly, and for the first time, large portions of the population lived in dense, crowded urban areas. Life in industrial cities was both exciting and difficult. Factories churned out goods at a staggering rate, and new technologies transformed daily life. But the living conditions for workers were often harsh. Housing was cramped and unsanitary, and workers, including women and children, labored long hours in dangerous conditions. The rapid growth of cities and the rise of industrialization created stark contrasts between the wealthy factory owners and the poor working class. The working conditions in factories were appalling. Long hours, low wages, and dangerous environments were common. This gap between the rich and the poor fueled social tensions, which eventually led to the rise of labor movements. The rise of the working class and labor movements. As industrialization advanced, it created a new working class. The vast majority of people who worked in factories, mines, and railroads were laborers, people who worked long hours in exchange for wages that were often far below what was necessary to support a family. Workers were the engine of industrial progress, but they had little power and often faced terrible working conditions. In response to these conditions, workers began to organize and demand better treatment. The rise of labor unions in the 19th century was a direct response to the exploitative practices of industrial factories. These unions fought for better wages, shorter working hours, and improved working conditions. The labor movements in Britain, the United States, and other industrializing nations led to the first laws regulating working hours, wages, and child labor. Eventually, the push for workers' rights resulted in significant social and political change. including the rise of socialist ideas and political reforms aimed at improving the lives of the working class. The environmental and social costs of industrialization. Despite its many advances, the Industrial Revolution also came with significant environmental and social costs. The need for coal to power factories, steam engines, and trains led to the widespread extraction of natural resources, often at the expense of the environment. Air pollution became a serious problem in cities, where factories spewed smoke into the air and rivers became clogged with industrial waste. The industrial landscape was marked by the scars of mining and deforestation, as cities and factories expanded to meet the growing demands of industrial economies. The rapid pace of industrialization also created social problems. The rise of factory work, the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, and the exploitation of workers led to growing inequality. This inequality created tensions between the working class and the wealthy industrialists, tensions that would eventually lead to significant social and political movements. The legacy of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was one of the most transformative periods in human history. It reshaped the way people lived, worked, and interacted with the world. From the rise of factories and railroads to the creation of the modern working class and the growth of urban cities, the Industrial Revolution laid the foundation for the modern world. Yet, as we reflect on the Industrial Revolution, we must also recognize its complexities. It brought immense wealth and technological advancement, but also deep social inequality and environmental damage. The legacy of the Industrial Revolution is a double-edged sword, shaping the world in ways both positive and negative. The revolution that began in Britain changed not just the country, but the entire world. The machines, the factories, and the technologies that arose during this period helped create the modern economy we know today. The lessons learned from the Industrial Revolution about innovation, sustainability, and the need for social responsibility are still relevant as we face the challenges of the 21st century. The Industrial Revolution, legacy, challenges, and the path forward. The global impact of the Industrial Revolution. As the Industrial Revolution progressed, its influence spread across the globe, touching nearly every nation on Earth. What began as a British innovation soon reached continental Europe and North America, transforming entire economies. By the mid-19th century, industrialization had taken root in countries like Germany, France, and the United States, each of which adopted the key innovations that made Britain the leader of the Industrial Revolution. But while industrialization fueled economic growth in these nations, it also increased the global divide between industrial and non-industrialized nations. In Europe, countries like Germany quickly adopted Britain's methods of industrialization, making significant advances in steel production and railways. Germany's iron and coal industries expanded rapidly, fueled by technological innovations in manufacturing and infrastructure. In fact, Germany's industrial growth was so rapid that by the late 19th century, it had caught up with Britain in terms of industrial production, particularly in chemical industries and heavy manufacturing. The United States was another key player in the industrial transformation. Beginning in the early 19th century, the US was heavily influenced by the Industrial Revolution. By the 1860s, the country was experiencing a period of rapid growth. Railroad expansion, steel production, and innovations like mass production techniques allowed the US to industrialize quickly. The development of Ford's assembly line in the early 20th century revolutionized manufacturing, making products like automobiles affordable for the average consumer and accelerating the growth of the consumer economy. In Asia, countries like Japan saw the Industrial Revolution as an opportunity to modernize and strengthen their economies. After the Meiji Restoration of 1868, Japan adopted Western industrial methods and quickly became an industrial power. Like other industrial nations, Japan relied on railways, steamships, and coal to fuel its factories and mines, and it began producing textiles, steel, and machinery for both domestic use and export. The environmental cost, a price for progress. While the Industrial Revolution brought great prosperity to many nations, it came with significant environmental costs. The extensive use of coal to fuel factories, railroads, and steamships contributed to widespread pollution. Cities became smog-choked environments, where the air was thick with coal dust and industrial waste. Rivers were no longer clean waterways. They became dumps for chemical waste, factory runoff, and sewage. Mining, the backbone of industrialization, also took a toll on the environment. The extraction of coal, iron ore, and other natural resources scarred landscapes, destroyed ecosystems, and caused long-term environmental damage. This unsustainable exploitation of natural resources had wide-ranging effects, including deforestation and loss of biodiversity. As industrialization progressed, the consequences of pollution became impossible to ignore. The industrial world was creating wealth and progress, but it was also creating environmental damage on an unprecedented scale. It was clear that unchecked growth could not be sustained, and the world's dependence on coal and other fossil fuels was contributing to a global environmental crisis. In the 20th century, the legacy of this industrial pollution would come to the forefront, with the advent of environmental movements that sought to address the damage done by industrialization. It would take decades of activism and policy changes to begin addressing the environmental issues that had been ignored for so long. Social changes and the rise of the middle class. Beyond the environmental impact, the Industrial Revolution transformed social structures in profound ways. The birth of the middle class was one of the most important social outcomes of industrialization. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, society was largely divided between the wealthy aristocracy and the poor working class. But with the growth of industry and the rise of factory owners, merchants, and entrepreneurs, a new class emerged. The middle class included businessmen, managers, professionals, and factory owners. These people had the wealth and education to advance in society, and they sought to distinguish themselves from the working class. They lived in suburban areas and enjoyed better living conditions, better health care, and more access to education. As the Industrial Revolution progressed, this class grew larger and became a powerful economic and political force. At the same time, the working class grew in numbers as well, but the conditions for factory workers, particularly those in textile mills, mines, and steel factories, were often brutal. The industrial workforce was subjected to long hours, poor wages, and dangerous conditions. Child labor was widespread, with children as young as 5 or 6 working in factories and mines. The Industrial Revolution was a time of great social inequality. The gap between the wealthy industrialists and the impoverished workers was vast. And while the middle class grew in wealth and power, the working class was subjected to harsh conditions that led to rising social unrest. The birth of the welfare state. In response to the growing disparity between the rich and the poor, the social problems that arose from industrialization led to the development of labor movements and social reforms in the 19th century. Labor unions began to form, advocating for better wages, shorter working hours, and improved working conditions. These movements laid the groundwork for the modern welfare state and labor laws that would shape the 20th century. One of the key outcomes of the labor movement was the establishment of laws that regulated working hours and conditions. The Factory Acts in Britain, which began in the 19th century, were among the first laws to address the exploitation of workers, particularly women and children. These laws regulated working hours, set minimum age requirements for factory workers, and introduced safety regulations. In addition to labor laws, the growing awareness of the need for social safety nets led to the creation of public health programs, education systems, and social services aimed at improving the quality of life for working-class people. These social reforms marked the beginning of the shift toward modern welfare states, where governments began to take responsibility for the well-being of their citizens. The cultural impact: a new society. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change the economy, it changed society in profound ways. The rise of factories and cities led to a massive shift in social dynamics. People moved from rural areas to urban centers in search of work, leading to the rapid growth of cities. This urbanization transformed the way people lived, worked, and interacted with one another. In the new industrial cities, people from diverse backgrounds came together, working side by side in factories and living in close quarters in crowded tenements. The rise of the middle class also brought about a shift in cultural values, as people sought education, social mobility, and economic independence. The industrial economy created new opportunities for wealth and advancement, but it also created new divisions between the classes. The Industrial Revolution's enduring legacy. The Industrial Revolution, while creating immense wealth and transforming society, also left a legacy that continues to shape the world today. The innovations that emerged during this period, steam power, mass production, railroads, and factories, laid the foundation for the modern industrialized world. The rise of cities, the expansion of transportation networks, and the birth of mass consumerism are all direct results of the Industrial Revolution. But the Industrial Revolution also created deep social inequalities and environmental damage that we are still grappling with today. The exploitation of workers, the growth of industrial pollution, and the rise of corporate power are all issues that began during the Industrial Revolution and have continued to evolve. As we reflect on the Industrial Revolution, we must acknowledge both its triumphs and its costs. The transformation of society, economy, and technology that began in the late 18th century still reverberates today. It is a reminder that progress and innovation are often accompanied by unintended consequences, and that we must continue to balance growth with sustainability and equity.